So good morning, everyone. I think it's 11, right?
It is 11:02.
We're going to go ahead and get started. Phil isn't here today, and I will run the meeting with Jill and Dave and the whole team. Weekend is going to be a little bit late. She asked that we do the public hearing items last. Well, she didn't ask, but we're going to do it last so that hopefully she can be here before then. So we'll just go down the regular order of the agenda. So if there are any questions regarding set hearing, any questions on 1325?
It's like this is just like a definition change, kind of. It's not going to have a big impact on the regulated community.
Yes. Oh, you know.
Yes, you're correct. Definition change, right, Susan? Susan, come on.
Yes,
The back.
it's a definition change.
You want to elaborate on it, Karen?
Yeah, so when we amended Reg 13, I think it was 2 years ago, we had modified the definition for a significant source or a major source, and EPA had commented that the definition was missing some, a portion of it. So it's just correcting the definition for major source.
Any questions concerning 1403, asbestos emissions?
Mark Taylor's been getting calls from a guy who's worried about this rule that it's
Is that, what is it, NASLAC or?
something like that.
What's his name? Mazik, that's it.
I don't know what it's going to do, so Mark's going to talk to him. But,
Well, I know he had a lot of concerns with the interpretation between Fed and our requirements, and Sarah, do you want to?
Yeah, so he has a lot of concerns about the fact that our rule is more stringent than the federal requirements, but our rule has always been more stringent than the federal requirements, and we believe we have good reason to do that because we have such a densely populated area. There's a greater risk of exposure, et cetera. So we're not actually changing any of that in this rule revision. We're not adding additional requirements. It's really a clarification of existing rule language, as well as fixing some areas where we had pointed to federal provisions that no longer exist, and so making sure that we point to the right sections of federal rules and that that's clear for everybody as what's expected.
Any other questions on asbestos? Mark?
Yeah, this has come really a long way. I mean, I've been through most of those, and it seems like virtually everything has been resolved. Are there any real remaining issues?
We still have some concerns that are being articulated by the utilities about emergency
Right.
notification. We actually had a very long meeting 2 days ago with them to discuss air out their concerns more. I would say that we have philosophical agreements. It's all about how things are implemented, and so they're asking for more clarification on particular situations, how this would apply. But I feel that we've come to a pretty good resolution with them in terms of being clear what an emergency is and how they can proceed during those situations.
Great, amazing project. And just kind of a side thing, is there like an internal competition between the two ADEOs on public involvement on these things? Because I would say that
No.
I don't know. I see canines showing up in your meeting.
That's true.
So I would say that you've kind of gone just a little
We've
bit
cornered
above.
the animal market, yes.
They're going for the cute back.
Yes.
I have pictures.
I know there was some question about the facts, and
Yes.
we committed to moving forward on set hearing and also trying to get the facts out as soon as possible.
That's correct.
Can you provide an update on?
Yeah,
where we are with
so
the
we're
facts?
looking to release the frequently asked questions early in December. We're just going through review to make sure, mostly that they're grammatically correct more than anything else. And the majority of the frequently asked questions are frankly on existing rule provisions. One of the things we're finding going through this rule revision is there's a lot of misinformation and not very good understanding about how the rule actually worked. So they're not really facts on new provisions or anything that we're changing. It's really about how things had always been implemented. But it's been a really good process, I think, to be able to have that forum for education and better understanding.
Any other questions?
I'm a bit
Yeah.
confused about where you say that the proposed amendment is exempt on CEQA in that paragraph. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so my understanding is because this is a rule amendment that doesn't actually result in a change in ambient air quality, so no increase in emissions or any difference from that. It's not a CEQA, it's not required to go through CEQA, so therefore it is exempt.
Okay, thank you.
Any other question?
Do you want to bounce to the public hearings then, or just?
Now
keep
that
going?
Ruth-Ann's here,
Thank you.
we'll bounce to the public hearing
That was a
portion.
huge wreck.
Thank you.
Which
We all know
freeway
this.
held you up? Or all of them?
2 hours wasn't enough.
Yes.
So it looks like you took off the MHF presentation for December 7th?
So the chair will not be at the December board meeting, so we decided to postpone that, and we'll be going either in January or February.
So we don't need to bring a sleeping bag and cooler full of food.
Hopefully not, yeah.
Very
But-
happy.
Susan, you want to do 11:18?
So for 1118.1, this will go to the January public hearing, but we've been working with the stakeholders. We had a working group meeting before Thanksgiving. I think we're making some good progress in regards to some of the key issues that we had brought up at Stationary Source. This item will come back to the Stationary Source Committee in December. And we're just continuing to kind of move forward and hopefully getting to a place of more agreement. So I think at the end of the day, we may not be in full agreement with all the stakeholders, but in terms of on the new flares and establishing a limit, we're looking at an option that it looks like the oil and gas industry is coming to some type of agreement with us in terms of some type of limitation.
Can you explain, Susan, sort of the main concern with regards to unlimited operation with a new flare versus the intent of the flaring aspect? Because I think that's really at the crux of what we're trying to resolve, right?
Right, so what we're trying to do is encourage folks that are flaring to use their gas beneficially. So have it go through some other type of device to power another device. So the oil and gas industry in general has a high percentage of beneficial use that they use their gas, and so trying to minimize use of their flares. There are some flares in some locations of facilities where using the gas beneficially is that they either don't have enough gas or there's difficulty in using it beneficially. So for those that we're looking at some type of a carve out, but then for the other facilities, if they would replace that old flare, the concern is that if we don't have some limitation, that the emissions could possibly be higher than if they were using it beneficially with an older, dirtier flare. So we're going to establish some type of limitation for the new flares, but one concern is that we don't want to have a limitation that's so stringent that it's going to discourage someone from replacing an old, dirty flare with a new flare, a new, cleaner flare. But we also want to have some sense that we're not going to be increasing emissions by allowing them just to go to a newer flare with unlimited amount of flaring. So I think we're coming to a good place in that. So we're still working with them. We discussed one of the options, listened to kind of what their concerns were, and I think we have a proposal that will hopefully be able to move us forward on 1118.1.
I'm hearing from at least community members, or at least the one community member who's been very vocal, that the changes appear to be going backwards, and they're increasingly less happy.
They or he?
Yeah.
Thank you.
But, I mean, he's really the only one out there that is representing the community interest, which is focused on the AQMP provision. And one thing that confuses me is the AQMP except for new source review, is an existing source emission reduction plan. And this rule does essentially nothing for existing sources. And so I'm trying to understand the context of this effort with respect to the SCAQMD and reducing emissions from existing sources. And secondly, the other portion of it being for those existing sources that are not making beneficial use to reduce that routine flaring.
Yeah, I mean, currently, there's no requirements to use any percentage of gas beneficially for any of the industries, the non-refinery flares. So I think to say that, there's no benefit associated with it, I think that's not accurate. So we established thresholds for if they go over a certain capacity, that they would need to then make the decision that they're either gonna increase their beneficial use or they're gonna replace their flare, and that's where we get the reductions from those sources. So to say that, for those existing flares, the way that we will get the reductions is if it's an old dirty flare, they're gonna need to replace it or use it beneficially, and they have a certain amount of time to do that. So we will get reductions from those existing flares. And they have two choices. They can either, increase their beneficial use, or they can, or they can replace it with a clean flare.
Okay, and I hope you didn't take my words to suggest that currently nobody is making beneficial use. My point was just that there's nothing in here, well, there's little in here to eliminate a lot of the routine beneficial use, or at least that's the concern that I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the items that we had discussed with the working group is in terms of their, the oil and gas has a high percentage of beneficial use now. And so the concern is, if they were to expand, it's like, and if they got a new flare, are they now gonna all of a sudden change and they're not gonna be sending their gas, through something else, and they're gonna be flaring it? The answer was no. It saves them money to use it beneficially. To just flare it, they're just wasting a product that they could save money. So that's when we started kind of rethinking. They're saying we kind of put their money where their mouth is, saying if they're saying, well, the use of the beneficial use of the gas is going to remain the same in the future, then we're saying, okay, then we're going to hold you to that amount of beneficial use that you were doing before, or the amount that you're sending to your flare, and then we'll give you a little bump up for growth. And they're saying, okay, we think we can live with something like that. So I think the fact that they're saying that they can live with something like that is saying that, yes, that their throughput that they are experiencing today would be similar to what they would expect in the future. So they would still try to burn that gas beneficially than through a flare.
I understand your point, but just kind of a heads up that
This other gentleman is expressing his view. We're still trying to work with him. Phil's been talking with him.
We're in that boat. I talked to my public works folks, and we have 5 or 7 landfills or something, so our flares are so old, we need to replace them anyway, so no harm, no foul.
Thanks. Next one, Susan.
So proposed, the next one is proposed amended rules 1146, 1146.1, and 1146.2. Applies to boilers, process heaters, and boilers, and steam generators. And this will apply to reclaim and non-reclaim facilities. Establishes emission limits. We did a BARC assessment looking at the NOx level. Facilities, reclaim facilities are going to need to meet the new NOx emission limit. We did tighten up just a little bit on the 1146 and 1146.1 limit. So some units are going to need to meet a lower limit. We do acknowledge that folks that are close to the limit, that we give them the opportunity that when they do the burner replacement, that they could meet the limit at that time, up to a maximum of 15 years. The rule will implement these controls 1 year before the requirement under AB 617 and gives an extra year, actually it's 2 years before AB 617 and gives them 1 extra year if they decide to replace the whole unit versus just retrofit. So trying to provide an incentive for folks to replace the unit versus retrofit, which we get even more reductions. Any questions?
Everybody sort of on board with this?
Issues,
Said sort of.
I think we'll hear the same that we've heard, right, from Mike Carroll and others.
Not so much on the issue of retrofit or replacement, because most of it is talking about burner replacement, not unit replacement. There is additional after controls for SCR for some of the larger units to meet the lower NOx emission limits. What you will hear possibly is the key issue in regards to that we should hold off on the landing rules because we should resolve the new source review issues. Our response would be, no, we need to move forward on these landing rules, that facilities would be implementing this as an overlay to reclaim, gives them the heads up, they now know where they need to go, and gives them time to plan. If we start, pushing everything later and later, then I think it gives them less of an opportunity to, we're gonna have to compress the schedule so we can be consistent with AB 617. There are comments in regards to the newer NOx limit of 7 ppm, and our agency isn't alone on this. San Joaquin already has a 7 ppm limit. There's over 700 units that are meeting that NOx concentration limit today. We've talked to 3 vendors that can provide these burners that can meet this NOx emission limit. So possibility that there could be folks that are saying, well, it's not possible, but we have a lot of information that shows it's definitely possible, and San Joaquin is already there.
Any questions? Moving on to number 29.
So number 29 is we're going to be proposing that we withdraw this from the public hearing. We have been working with the Metals Coalition and the 3 facilities that have volunteered to do source testing. We're preparing an RFP that will go out to have a third party conduct the source testing. We've made a lot of really good progress working with these facilities. It's been very collaborative. So we feel pretty confident that we can remove this from the a rule that would need to go forward right now, and then we would come back later in about 2 years with information or the real proposed rule 1407.1 that'll establish limits and requirements for chromium metal melting operations.
So he's got to come back in 2 years?
Yeah, it's about probably a year, 1 to 2 years, depending on how quickly we can move in the rule development. We have to finish the source testing, analyze the source test, then develop the requirements, and then move forward. So just the process itself will probably be about 1.5 years to 2 years.
Any questions?
So you feel pretty confident that you will have a rule out of this data then?
Oh, yeah, we will have a rule out of this. Yeah.
So we'll go back to the regular order and move on to budget. Matt?
So number 3, you may recall, I think it was last month, we came to the board to ask approval to move forward with Zanza zero non-emission freight facilities proposal that was awarded by ARB, a $45 million contract. So these are 2 similar proposals that the ports put in under that same solicitation with ARB. These both were awarded fairly significant funds from the Air Resources Board, but they've also asked us to participate in this development of cleaner, near zero and zero emission technologies. In particular, at the Port of LA, they're going to be demonstrating the fuel cell trucks with Toyota and Kenworth. And then the Port of Long Beach, they're doing a variety of different near zero emission port equipment. So not on-road trucks, but yard hauslers and cranes and things of that nature. So we're requesting that the board allow us to enter into co-funding agreements with both ports.
I have one little question. The vehicles that are being purchased, they will remain with the ports?
Typically, no. Depends on the status of the manufacturer. So for example, the Toyota vehicles will likely not remain in service after the life of the contract because the intent is to demonstrate the feasibility and for them to optimize it. And so oftentimes, same with our Daimler project, they don't want these less than optimal vehicles still on the road. So if they're operating well, then they allow them to use them further, but the intent is to get to a commercial product, not to just keep them in prototypes. So depending on the nature of the demonstration, how well it works out, they may allow them to use it for some period of time, but oftentimes prototypes are not kept in service for the life of the vehicle.
We have a heck of a lot of prototypes out there. And I would think maybe 1 or 2 per category would have been sufficient.
No. Yeah, that's actually a misunderstanding that a lot of people think is that once you do a demonstration, you can just keep that vehicle in service. Oftentimes there's at least 3 or 4 cycles of demonstration, so they often call them beta, alpha, and then final pre-commercial and then commercial. Because you really don't want these older prototypes on the road and then having people compare that to the potential product just because they'll have issues with it. The next item is an item that we're proposing to work with the Senate at the UC Riverside CSER to do an evaluation of biodiesel and renewable diesel. So you may recall that, and this is really for off-road category, there aren't a lot of technologies that are available to get to near zero and zero emission technologies in the off-road, especially construction equipment. And we've shown this before in previous demonstrations. There's just space limitation, visibility issues when you start putting after treatment and other things on these vehicles. And so one way to get immediate NOx reductions is to look at renewable diesel and potential biodiesel blends with NOx mitigation solutions put inside the biodiesel. So this is to evaluate those different blends in an off-road application with the hope of achieving probably 10 to 13% NOx reductions in a drop in fuel, which would be better than just with no mitigation. So this is to help co-fund a study with CSER. We're partnering with ARB and the EPA and the San Juan County.
And this is playing with fuel blends for risk and NOx instead of after treatment.
Yeah, because like I said, it's difficult to re-engineer some of these construction equipment. And that would take a long lead time for engineering and whatnot. So this could be a more immediate half solution or quarter solution, but at least it's getting us some emission benefit.
Thanks, Matt. So our next item is on the executing contract to conduct preliminary cost and economic impact analysis of the proposed warehouse indirect source rule. Sarah?
Yeah, so this is just really to execute that contract to do the work. I don't know if you guys have any particular questions about the details of that.
Hearing none. All right, so the next one, number 6.
Musical chairs.
I do all the exciting stuff.
But you came to Canaan.
So the RFP for the engineering consultant, number 6.
So we're going to be releasing an RFP for looking at our technology assessment for Rule 1109.1. 1109.1 is the barked landing rule for refineries. And so we're progressing through the information that the refineries had provided us. We had a working group meeting yesterday. So staff is getting close to the point where we're going to be recommending certain emission limits for different pieces of equipment for the equipment at refineries. And so we want to have a third party review our analysis, and so that's what this RFP is for.
I've got a question. There's in the work description, there's something which says that the contractor should look at technologies only for which there are 2 suppliers. And I'm wondering why that's the case, because you can easily have somebody out there who's building a better mousetrap, and you've kind of eliminated this push to better technologies if you're requiring more than one person to be able to provide technology before you're looking at it.
I actually don't recall. Yeah, let us go back and look at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I think part of the concern, Mark, has to do with competitiveness, cost competitiveness.
But
I understand
cost
what you're
gets-
talking about.
But cost also gets taken into account on
Right.
this too, so.
Right. It gets taken into account from the perspective of if it's not cost competitive, then it wouldn't be barked, right? And so if you have at least competition on the cost aspect, I think you have a better assurance of, in fact, meeting the barked aspect.
You can have somebody with a new technology that chooses to price it so it's competitive against other technologies.
So long as it's competitive, right?
Well, it all goes as part of the BAP analysis, the BART
Right,
analysis.
right. I agree. Okay, number 7. Derek is actually en route back from DC, so Fabian, there you are. Fabian, go for it.
All right, this item is to execute contracts for legal representation in Washington, D.C. We took this before the Legislative Committee in November. As a result of that, the Legislative Committee unanimously voted to recommend 3 of the consulting firms to represent us in D.C. The 3 firms are the Carmen Group, Cassidy and Associates, and Kavish and Associates. All 3 of these firms have represented us in D.C. for the past several years as a team. The total funding for the representation contract is just over $664,000 on an annual basis, with the option of renewal for 2 one-year extensions contingent upon board approval of the budget for the respective fiscal years. Are there any questions?
Just to clarify, you said at the beginning, legal representation is legislative advocacy, right?
It's advocacy. Did I say legal?
I thought I heard you say legal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We know
So
it.
these guys
So the
aren't lawyers.
legislative committee
Yeah.
unanimously approved it, no.
And the contracts are for legislative representation.
And it's actually more than just legislative, right? It's actually advocacy, whether it's with the Congress or whether it's with the administration or any of the other executive branch agencies.
Any other questions? Item number 8 is to issue an RFP for consulting services for SCAQMD environmental justice outreach and initiatives. The Environmental Justice Community Partnership is an initiative that was announced in February 2015 by Governing Board Chair William Burke. It's important to keep an active presence throughout the South Coast and engage in environmental justice efforts year-round. The proposal for the environmental justice program is for a 1-year period not to exceed $160,000, with an option for up to 2 one-year contract renewals contingent upon performance and approval of budgets and board approval. Are there any questions?
No, yeah, I was curious. How large a group population-wise do you consider the DJ community throughout the district?
Huge.
It strikes me as it's very large.
It's huge.
So $116,000 is to what?
That's it's coordination and regular interaction with the Environmental Justice Advisory Council, execution of a youth bus tour that we do once a year, touring the environmental justice areas. This year we're going to include the port. Execution of a series of 4 environmental justice workshops that we have throughout all 4 counties. And then we ended with an environmental conference at the end of the year.
It's a fabulous conference, by the way.
Thank you.
That was really good this year.
Thank you.
If it took me 3 hours to get there, I missed the first session.
I'm sorry. Was it 116 or 160?
Joe.
160. Okay, that's what I'm thinking. That's what I thought.
Any other questions? That's it.
Thanks, Fabian. John, on item number 9?
Number 9, this item is to request approval to enter into a contract to operate the Diamond Bar headquarters cafeteria. As a result of an RFP process, we're recommending entering into a contract with the company receiving the highest rating, California Dining Services, for a 3-year term beginning January 1st, 2019. California Dining Services has been providing cafeteria management services to the district since 2004. Happy to answer any questions.
Are they ever going to take credit cards?
That's a good question. We're going to start talking to them about that in the next contract.
You charge 25 cents. It's okay.
Getting antiquated.
Direct
We're gonna
question
use
from my
WeChat.
boss.
I would appreciate that.
Okay, and then I have the last one.
So the next item, number 10.
Okay, so this item is actually quite large. It's almost $25 million worth of items. There's 3 parts to it. The first is we're asking to restore what we cut in the budget in order to balance it when it was adopted, and our finances looked pretty good. So we're asking to restore some of the things like the vacancy rate. We'll put it back to 8%, some services and supplies, and the total is about 4.2 million. The restoration is about 3.6, but we're also adding in about $600,000 for some vehicles and some work on the initiative for China to get the cleaner ships here. So that's the first part. The second part is for AB 617. We're now really involved with the steering committees, and we're going to be starting the emission reduction plans and the monitoring next year. And so we're expecting to receive $20 million from ARB. So we, to do this work, we're actually asking to add 52.5 FTEs for $3.6 million, adding about $4.5 million of supplies, which includes cars for some new inspectors, all kinds of equipment to operate our mobile van and other equipment, and then a couple of contracts. And then the third piece of this is to recognize about $420,000 that is coming to South Coast as part of the VW mitigation program. And we are actually implementing 2 out of the 5 programs throughout the state. So this is the administrative portion of the VW money that we can use, and we need 5 additional positions there for this program. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
What's the China partnership for cleaner shipping? I haven't heard of that before.
Do you want Sarah to talk about that, or Wayne? Sarah's going, go for it, Wayne. Sorry, Sarah.
Yes, so this is the work that we're doing to try to get a collaborative program together with China or different ports in China to get cleaner vessels calling at our ports as well as Chinese ports. We know that there's a lot of trade, obviously, between our ports and Chinese ports. Those vessels travel on a circuit between Chinese ports and our ports. So the idea is if we can work together and have a collaborative incentive program, we may be able to pull enough resources together to influence shipping behavior and get cleaner vessels on those routes.
We spoke about this at the board retreat this year out in Palm Desert. Is that right? Palm Desert? And the concept is by knowing the route that the ships take, by knowing the ports along those routes, we can get those individual ports, so not only us, but Bay Area, Shanghai, Hong Kong, all of those ports would contribute, in essence, to the vessel. And the vessel would get the benefit of having like 5 different ports now contributing to hopefully a cleaner vessel, a Tier 3 or a Tier 2. So we met with the Ministry of Environment and Ecology, or Ecology and Environment, and we also met with Ministry of Transport at the Director General level. Got a lot of support, and we're moving forward on that. Part of the first aspects of those meetings is the Technology Forum, which will be next week, which I hope many of you can attend. And then we've also been invited back to China in January to again further those discussions. So this is really important because of the fact that ocean-going vessels are going to become the largest source of NOx in a few years. We want to be able to try to reduce those emissions. So the broad concept was, we looked at this from what are the real sources that are impacting us as a region. We know that heavy-duty trucks are a big impact, the mobile sources. And so we moved aggressively to develop a petition, submit that petition to EPA, and 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, EPA announced that they're going to move forward on that. And
On a new emission standard for ocean-going vessels?
for the heavy-duty trucks.
Oh, heavy-duty trucks, I'm sorry.
So ocean-going vessels are a much tougher challenge because of the authority issue.
Yeah, so ocean-going vessels, those emission standards are actually established internationally by the International Maritime Organization, which is a body of the UN. We do have some federal authority as well, but unless those vessels were actually flagged in the US, meaning that they're registered here effectively, we wouldn't be able to address them, and pretty much all the vessels are not flagged in the US, so it would be very difficult for EPA to be able to make meaningful emission standards. IMO last set emission standards for NOx for vessels back in 2015. We call them Tier 3 vessels. IMO is not going to set any new standards anytime soon. And those Tier 3 vessels, they're only applicable within emission control areas, so very limited areas. North America has an emission control area. Europe has one, and they're moving to NOx emission controls, but it's not all over the world. So, IMO standards have very limited utility for us.
Sarah, what's the expected life expectancy of these vessels? Isn't it really long, kind of like trains?
They hang out for many,
forever.
many decades. So,
Yeah.
Could be
So when
40.
you move, a ship moves into an emission control area, they have to meet a certain standard.
Right, they have to use a low
So you can't
sulfur
use a
fuel,
1940.
and they have to have, if they're built after a certain year, they have to have, be able to meet NOx emission standards. But if they're earlier, if they're older vessels, they don't have to meet any of that. They have to burn the lower sulfur fuel, but they don't have any requirements for NOx.
What's our sense in regard to the feds moving on the heavy-duty trucks? What are they committing to? Have they made a commitment?
So they've committed to look at everything with regards to the trucks. So when I say everything, they're going to be looking at the testing protocol. They're going to be looking at the certification. They're going to be looking at the emission endpoints. So their desire is very similar to what Engine Manufacturers Association and Diesel Technology Forum has said, which is we can get a lot of reductions by looking at the whole process, the actual real-world duty cycles. And they think that they can deliver those reductions either with or without changing the emission standard. But the rulemaking effort is technology forcing. So they're not going to be able to say that, well, we don't think that trucks can't meet the standard, because what we said is, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, there's over 40,000 CNG trucks that are already at 0.02, or is it 20,000? Something along those lines is what.
Because if you include the 8.9 liters and then the 12s, they're probably about 10,000.
Yeah. So what our point was, there's already a demonstration that these vehicles are doing that. And then what we said at a conference was, you guys have to go big on this. Because Daimler was in the meeting, Volvo was in the meeting. We said, you guys are already looking at zero emissions. So to say that you're going to stay at 0.2 is ridiculous. And from my perspective, to be at 0.02, we're already showing you it can be done. You should be at zero. So it's that process, it's that rulemaking process that's going to begin. We will be involved with that, as will ARB.
So we have long-haul trucks at 0.02 now?
Yes. There was one in our parking lot a couple weeks ago.
So this initiative that we're talking about in the ocean-going vessels is sort of part of that broader area where we're extending our leadership, if you will, where we don't have specific authority, but we're having the ability to impact those sources, even though we don't have that authority, to our benefit.
Any questions?
One more. We're getting $20 million in 617 money.
Yes.
Which is very exciting, and I'm sure there are a lot of happy engineers out there right now. But what about ongoing? I mean, that this is a one-time commitment and
We got
2 years.
10.8 million last year, and then the legislature had a 2-year commitment for 50 million statewide. So we're getting 20 out of the 50 this year. We expect we'll get that many next year. We have 3 communities in South Coast. There's 10 statewide, but we're covering a huge geographical area and population. It's really important that we do a great job on the first parts of this program, because that's going to be the test for the legislature to do continued sustained funding. So we're in good shape for this 20 million, the next 20 million, and then after that, we're going to have to really show that we've done a great job throughout the state in order to get more money. So frankly, if the money dries up, we're not going to be able to sustain the efforts.
There's a lot of skepticism among some folks in the EJ communities about the program, but, you know, from what I've seen, 3 steering committee meetings, I think the district has really put its best foot forward, and
Thank you.
haven't heard some of the complaining that sometimes we get from some of these people when other agencies like DTSC are dealing with them, so.
Can you elaborate on the skepticism you're hearing?
I think some people just feel like it's just gonna be a big paper chase, and that there's not gonna be any real reductions where, and there issue questions about, you know, who has the authority and to deal with some of the bigger problems. But actually last night I thought staff did a real good job of explaining how they might be able to do that. So I think that the process, the way staff is implementing it, is really quite impressive so far. I mean, the tough parts are yet to come, but see, and it's actually pretty amazing how much staff is able to do given the limited resources, but it's like all hands on deck.
So it seems like the appropriate response to the skepticism is to say to folks, hey, you wanted participation, and we're trying to get that started. We don't know where it's going to go in the final analysis, but you need to participate.
Yeah, there's nothing to confirm any skepticism at all. I mean, it's been, for at least from my perspective, you know, perfection so far each way, all along.
we had a good turnout in San Bernardino, and staff did a really good job of allaying concerns. They were really good, thoughtful comments and legitimate concerns, and it was a good meeting.
I think we're putting a lot of time and attention into trying to set and manage expectations, because Wayne's been involved in a lot of these meetings where people are saying the metric for success is less asthma hospital admissions, or, you know, things that are really, really hard to quantify, less cancer cases. And you can't do that on a short term. So we're trying to say, okay, well, we're going to direct incentive money so we can say, this is the number of school buses or trucks that we've replaced. This is the emission reductions in this area. Or we're measuring a whole lot of air pollutants. Can we see decreases? So we're trying to do that so that we can come out of this in year 2, 3, 4, 5, however many years it takes, to show that we've actually done some really meaningful and impactful things and will improve the public health, but they're things that you can actually kind of measure or quantify, and not some of the other ones which are important but challenging to measure.
One of the best examples I can give you is really that in the face of people on the committee suggesting that they disagreed with a direction that staff was looking at going into, rather than staff say, well, this is what we think you ought to do, and simply move on in that way, staff has said, okay, well, we'll change the way that we're doing things if this is what you folks want to do. So it's given the folks a real, I think, sense of empowerment, at least in terms of the committee movement. And then secondly, rather than setting a way that the staff is gonna be moving forward of it, the appearance is fairly clear that staff is taking the experience of each one and taking those learnings from each one and making some real changes to improve next time. And that's, each time you can see that, rather than just kind of with blinders, just kind of continue on the way you're going, and, whether it works or not is not relevant. So, those are just specific things that I noticed, and Dr. Liu has also mentioned to me that he is seeing.
Yifan?
Just some thoughts about, we talk about the matrix to account for success. Because, we all know that there's a temporal changes, the background concentration varies from year to year. It might not be a bad idea to have some control communities where you also track those matrix, where you can really compare when the EG communities receive additional resources. You can kind of like tease out the year-to-year variations and really quantify what benefits that goes into those EG communities. Some nearby non-EG area where it doesn't receive those additional resources might be a good way to allow you to quantify the differences.
Amplify the debate about their communities need to be year two, if you do that. But let us think about that suggestion and see if we're able
because
to.
I worry like year by year variations may bury some of those incremental changes. Very hard to say this is due to the AP 617 efforts or this is the regional effort. How are you gonna convince?
Not to interrupt, but I just say that we have the base 5s to do right now.
Yeah, you can piggyback it with something that the district already doing.
But it's important to remember that 617 is very specific, and 617 is not necessarily a health effects study. 617 is about identifying emissions, reducing those emissions in those communities. The issues that have been raised, and this is really the issue that's been from day one from the environmental groups, is a lot of them didn't trust the local districts because of their own experience in whatever district they were in, that the districts could actually do the work. That was a big source of opposition. The second aspect was there was a big concern by some communities about whether or not monitoring was even necessary. Forget monitoring. You guys have studied the hell out of us. We don't want monitoring.
Yeah. And
the point that we made is that there are things that we don't know that could be in the community. And if they're toxics issues, paramount, they're very important and they can have direct impacts. But the concept I think that's gotten the most pushback is this item about health effects and how do we track improvement in health, in community health. There's a number of different work groups that are associated with this project, but the larger one with ARB is the consultation work group. And a number of the groups said, we want to look at asthma cases. We want to look at all of these things. We want to look at controls. We want to look at gentrification. And there was this huge mission expansion that wasn't part of it. And so what some of the districts have really tried to make clear is, this is what it is. If you want to do a health effects study, go back to the legislature, get funding to do it, and set it up right. Dr. Bombs is the chair of this consultation group from ARB, and he totally supports the concept in terms of if we really want to look at health effects and public health, that's a completely separate study. And he said exactly what you said, Yifan, in terms of setting up controls, let's really looking at how we would do this. But that is not part of what 617 is. And so part of what we've been really trying hard to do is to manage those expectations and be very clear about what the role is and what we're going to do and how we're going to work. And I think that in answer to some of the other questions about what are some of the skepticism and concerns, it really is about this collaborative type effort. And there's a constant push and pull, right, between the regulated community and the regulators. The regulated community wants to have more of the authority to make decisions of the regulators. That was never contemplated within the legislation. And when we're asked that question, what we say is go talk to the legislature, and if they want to give you the authority to do that, great. But for now, we're going to work with you and work with us. And Mark is absolutely right, because after every single meeting that we have, we debrief, we figured out what worked, what didn't work, how do we improve it, and it's a constant learning experience. And that's the way we look at it, so we try to take it, and I hope that the community is actually seeing that. And we've heard a lot of good feedback. I mean, we've been to a lot of the same meetings as you guys, and you know, we're always excited when we've got a lot of participation. And I thought it was really interesting at the Wilmington meeting where we had some of the members of the steering committee say to other members of the steering committee, yeah, that's really not that important. We need to be focused here on these aspects. And we just had to sit back and let them kind of, you know, lead the meeting. So I think it's been really rewarding for a lot of us that have been there to see how this program can really work. But I think that there's so many issues that are coming up, and the funding is the big issue. We're already trying to reach out to the legislature to secure ongoing funding. Hopefully, it could be as perhaps a commitment through the greenhouse gas fund, the cap and trade funds. But you know, we need to reach out to the new governor, and we know that we've got the president pro tem and the speaker's support on these kind of issues. So that's what we're trying to do.
It occurs to me that this is primarily focused on localized pollution sources versus ambient, which means that in the inland area, there's going to be less satisfaction because their problem is transport and ambient levels of ozone, more so than anything in the heavily industrial areas of LA, which you're looking at localized pollution.
I would say it depends on the communities, right? I mean, in general, I agree with that assessment, but we know that there are a number of smaller shops, facilities that could have a pretty large impact, and I think that's where the monitoring aspect is going to be important. But clearly, the reduction in mobile sources is going to be critical for those communities. And that's why we have to be able to do a good job of actually defining in those communities what those reductions are.
Going back to item 10 on the agenda here. Okay, I noticed in subsection 7, I think it is, there's a reference to a bail agreement with the National Park Service. How is the National Park Service involved here?
Yeah, it's an interesting, let me pull that part out. It's an interesting arrangement of how we're going to be leasing a piece of equipment to monitor. And can you help me out on that one, Aaron? Thank you.
So I have a
Do a better
colleague
job.
at National Park Service, he's formerly a professor, and he has a proton transfer mass spectrometer that we're gonna borrow from him to try it out before we buy our own PTRMS. So that's the premise of that.
Yeah.
Where is it? Interesting. What office of the National Park Service is that?
He runs the monitoring network, much like our monitoring network. They have in the national parks throughout the United States.
Where's it located?
He's in Boulder,
Oh, okay.
but he was recently in Hawaii, and we went them some of our equipment when they were in Hawaii. So.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay. Interesting.
I mean, you still have more to go.
No, I've explained all the different moving parts. Thank you.
So on to item 11, the rule and control measure forecast.
So this item is typically in receive and file, but it's an action item. There's no action that's needed on the rule forecast report, but this rule forecast report will have the forecasts for all of the rules for 2019. And then also included in here is the AB 617 requirement where we're supposed to provide a expedited schedule for implementation of BARC rules. So there is an attachment to the rule forecast report, which is the action item where the board will need to adopt that. And it'll have the schedule for the rules that are associated with AB 617. So for the non-attainment pollutants, and we have some rules for many rules are for NOx. There's also some PM rules that are in there, and it has the schedule where we're projecting what quarter that rule will be brought forward to the governing board. And then there's other elements in there to satisfy the requirements for AB 617, talking about air quality and health benefits, attainment, and cost effectiveness.
And this is when you have to formally adopt.
Yes.
If it's not on this list, you can't do anything else.
For that year.
Right.
Mostly
There's
all
some
of them.
exceptions, but that's generally true.
So what changes are there in the schedule?
What changes, well, so the 2018 schedule only went up to 2018.
Right.
So, I think 1403 was one of them. There's a couple of rules that were in the first quarter that maybe have scooted 1 month. And then has
1410.
all the other, 1410 is in May. We have, I don't know, it's like there's so many rules. I'm not sure like specifically what your question is.
Is the revisiting of the TVAC issue, is that in there for next year?
It's on there as a TBD item, and so,
Okay.
yep.
As long as it's in there. You know, just a second point, if we could get some of these items that haven't gone through committee yet, if we could get them earlier than the night before, like the rules forecast, the night before our board consultants briefing, that might be helpful. That's the one, many months I have a little bit of difficulty being able to review it, and particularly for the December one.
Okay.
It makes it a little more difficult, because I wasn't able to look at it, and last night I was having fun at your 617 meeting, so.
Yeah, we were still making, some, because this is the mass calendar for 2019. So there were still some little additions and things that we were making even today, this morning. So I don't think that one is one of the items that's in your package today.
Okay. Okay, well, I wouldn't have been able to look at it anyway.
Yeah,
so.
okay.
Coming soon.
It's coming soon, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So, any questions on the information received and filed? So on the board calendar, there's still 2 outstanding, the mobile source committee, which I know we just approved, and the ARB report. Other than that, that's it. Are there any other general questions? Thoughts?
See if there's any public comment on those.
If there's nothing on the agenda, we'll see if there's any public comments. Hearing none. No further questions?
Any other business?
I appreciate you having this meeting. It helps me, I think we should only go dark in July, myself, because I like to have a meeting every time we have a board meeting, but I understand that holidays and things, and staff has other things to do, so I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I'll second that.
Yeah.
This is really helpful. I mean, this is.
Good.
Doesn't look that bad, but it actually is pretty dense, so.
Thanks.
It helps me target things.
Sounds good.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Thank
Mark, for
you.
the comments.
Sure.
That's what it helps me see.